What is the image of God? It's an interesting question. We all, if you've read the Bible, want to ask this question, but one thing you will realize is that people seem to disagree on what that image is. What I want to do today is not necessarily answer all the questions, but talk about what the image of God cannot be, and then give you some hints at what the image of God could be. And we'll do this by looking at 3 verses in Genesis chapter 1. Verses 26, 27, and 28. Put them on the screen here. I'll move it a little bit just so you can see it more clearly. 1:26 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.'" Well, at that point, we can suggest a number of things that are interesting before we get to the fuller picture. One, there's already been 5 days of creation where rocks and plants and animals were made. And in particular, humans are called the image of God here. And they have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock of the earth. So by implication, they have dominion over the sea, the air, and the earth as well, the things that were created prior to this. And that tells you something immediately. One, it tells you that the image of God is probably not something like a rock. A rock is created, it's made out of stuff, and it is a thing that has matter, material, and chemistry, and biology, or whatever, in ways that are similar to humans. We have this sort of rockishness in us, but we're not a rock. In fact, we have dominion over the earth. Well, maybe it's something more like a tree or a plant. That could be the image of God. And trees and plants have photosynthesis, can absorb water, can grow, can give seed. There are a lot of things that, the rock we share very little with, comparatively speaking, with the tree or the bush. And even there, it's not the full picture, and besides, we have dominion over them. Same with the fish of the sea, and so on. So maybe we are a little bit more like an animal, like a beast on the ground, or a dog, or a gorilla, or whatever else. And there's more than just the rock, and more than just the tree, the nutritive part of us that grows. There's something that we might say is animal in us. We have instinct, we procreate similar to an animal. We have a lot of things that are similar. They have fears, we have fears. It's hard to say that a plant has fear, at least in a way that we can understand. But animals tend to have fears and instinct, and we might say anger to a degree. And even then, there's still something that is different than us than in an animal. They're not the image of God. Only humans are the image of God. Christ only became a human being. He did not become a dog, or a gorilla, or a fish, or a cricket. He became a human being. And that seems to matter greatly. So, what else is going on here? Well, you might say, maybe there's something unique about our stature. We stand on our 2 feet, our shoulders are up, our mind, our brains are at the top of our body. We look around and we look down. Maybe there's some physiological feature that describes the image of God. Even then, a gorilla can stand on 2 feet and has hands and feet, and can look down and walk around on actually 4 limbs or 2 limbs. There are animals that do things that are similar to us in terms of our stature. Now, yes, to a degree, we seem to have a pretty unique stature overall because we're always on 2 feet, we're always standing up. Maybe there is a hint or a symbol or a sign there, but the fact that it is possible for a gorilla, for example, to stand like we can, walk like we can, at least for a short time, suggests that something like that can't be the image of God either. So the image of God doesn't appear to be anything in the prior 5 days of creation. It's not the earth, it's not the sea, it's not the sky, it's not the birds, it's not the fish, it's not the land creatures, it's not the rock, although we share parts of a rock, it's not the tree or bush, although we have aspects that are similar, it's not the animal, although we have aspects that are similar, it's not the animal that stands on 2 feet, although there are things that are similar. these characteristics cannot be alone what determine the image of God. We share as a sort of microcosm all the things that are created in the first 5 days in part. We're matter like a rock, we grow like a tree, we have instinct and fear like an animal, stand on 2 feet like some animals can do, temporarily at least. So there must be something else that is going on here. And whatever else it is, I would suggest that it is something that transcends merely physical or biological or external traits. Now, we do have a little bit of a hint here. We could go across the Bible, but I'll just kind of show you one place. We have a hint here in Genesis 2:7 that there is a sort of uniqueness to being a human. For example, verse 7 says, "Then the Lord God formed the man of the dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature." Now, we don't have any indication that this was how God created anyone else. In fact, we sort of know how God created things earlier. He said, "Let there be light," and there was light. He said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures," and it had happened. But interestingly, there seems to be something, I don't know, closer in God's creation. Closer is probably the wrong word, but just something about it that signifies, there's something special about being created in God's image. The making of being made in God's image happens through the breath of life. And you're reminded of Ecclesiastes or Job, which have verses that speak about our spirits or souls that return to God. The word spirit more accurately. The idea is that we seem to have spirit from the spiration of God. God expirates, we might say, into us with the breath of life. And that breath of life, that spiration, that spirit of life, creates life in us. We are animated by spiration. We might say we're a spirated animal for that reason. And I keep saying the word spirate. I should probably clarify. The Hebrew word for breath is tied to the idea of spirit. I think I can even show you this, or at least I can read it to you. The word breath here is God breathing in to our nostrils the breath of life. And it makes us a living creature. And that's a kind of a verb form of breath. And God is often associated with the Holy Spirit. And let me just show you that in chapter 1. Or at least there's something unique about it in chapter 1. Verse 2, "The earth was up without form and void, and darkness over the face of the earth, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." So maybe the Spirit of God is that which spirates in Genesis 2 and verse 7 into the man and makes him a spirated creature, spirated animal, we might say, a breathed into animal that receives the breath of life, what is called a living creature, living nefesh. Okay. All that to say, I don't know that I'd answered all of your questions, but I would say that the image of God is nothing that's created in the prior 5 days alone. It's not just being a rock, it's not just being a tree, it's not just being an animal, it's not just being any of these things. Even if you walk on 2 legs, it is something more, and perhaps Genesis 2, with its deeper uncovering of what it means to be created in God's image through this spirating activity, gives us a hint about that there is something more. I do want to mention one other thing before we that the Spirit of God is not, before I move on, and that's really important when we go here in verse 27. Actually, I might mention a bit more than just one. We'll see. Verse 27 says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." And this is important because the image of God is not sex or gender, but sex is kind of the more, traditional way of saying it. It's not maleness or femaleness. A man is created in the image of God, so is a female. There's an interesting thing of creation that happens, that God spirates life into man, Genesis 2:7, from the dust. And later on, the woman is taken from the side of man, from his, stuff, and but remains fully human, fully created in God's image, even through this process. So the image of God then is neither any of these things, and it seems to be connected to the unique way in which God creates us, the unique way in which God speaks about us, the unique way in which we have something that is beyond what is obvious in the lower orders of creation, or the earlier orders of creation. I want to read one more verse, because I think it's important to ask the question, if we're the image of God, what is the image of God for? And you might say, well, why would that be the obvious question? Well, if there's an acorn, you go ask the question, what's an acorn for? An acorn is for being the seed of an oak tree. It drops in the ground, goes into the ground, it sprouts a little bit, it grows and becomes an acorn tree. Everything seems to have a purpose, a time. The sun, moon, and stars are for signs, times, and seasons. We learn in Genesis chapter 1 as well. Everything seems to have its order and purpose. There's a purpose for everything in creation. There's a time for everything. There's a season for everything. And so what are we made for? And verse 28 of Genesis 1 seems to suggest some things that we're made for. Namely, God blesses humans, male and female, and said, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." We find out in the next chapter of Genesis that what it means to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth happens in the context of marriage. A man will leave his family and unite to a woman. They'll become one flesh. And they are, we would say, married, male and female, images of God, and they procreate, they fill the earth. Genesis 4 talks about that. The rest of the Bible, to a degree, talks about that. And so there seems to be something tied to marriage and family here. Now, some people would hear this and go, well, but doesn't Genesis, God know that people sometimes can't have children? They're biologically unable, or they can't find someone to marry. Does that mean they haven't fulfilled their created purpose? As an acorn is to be an oak tree, are we all meant to be married and to have children? And part of the answer to that question is, well, Jesus himself was neither married nor had biological children. And he was a perfect man. He was, according to Colossians 1:15, the image of God, from which we are all, let's say, lesser images. We're renewed into his image from 2 Corinthians 3, I think verse 18, Colossians 3:10, Ephesians 4:23 and 24. So what's going on here? Well, you've got to remember what happens with marriage. Marriage is the context. It's the fruition. It's what the image of God tends towards. But marriage, we learn from Ephesians 5:32, is always meant to be a sign. What kind of sign? Well, marriage was to be a sign of the gospel. Paul calls it a mystery of the gospel, namely that Christ loved the church and died for her and sanctified her. And so marriage and the one flesh union signifies what the church is. Signifies that the church is the body of Christ, Christ being the head, who unites the church in this loving union through his death and resurrection, so on the cross. The union of God and his people is what marriage always symbolized. And this means that the image of God tends towards marriage. Marriage itself is a signal or a sign or a post of the gospel, Christ united the church. And since marriage naturally leads to family, it is interesting that in the gospel, the description is usually that we're part of the household of God, that Jesus becomes our brother, Hebrews 2:11, he's not afraid to be called our brother. Throughout the Bible, we're adopted into the family of God. Christ is the Son by nature, we're sons and daughters by grace. And there seems to be this idea where Paul can talk to Timothy as a son in the faith, and he's a father to him. There's these familial, adoptive terms. We are now part of the family of God. You might say the Great Commission, then, is the way in which the family of God spreads across the earth. It fills and multiplies things today. Now, you might hear this and go, well, that's all good and well, that the image of God tends towards marriage and family are, in fact, well, marriage in particular, but family is the outcome of marriage, are, in fact, symbols or signposts of the gospel. But does that then have the opposite error, where it actually makes marriage and family less important? And the answer is no, it's quite the opposite. If marriage is a signpost for Christ for us in the gospel, for Christ dying for the church, Then a bad marriage, one where a husband hates his wife and is cruel to her or vice versa, is a marred or muddied sign of the gospel. If anything, natural marriage is elevated in its importance as a sign of the gospel, a sign that we must emphasize, and a sign that we must make clear. Likewise, according to Ephesians 3:14 and 15, God has always been a father of a son, and that's why there are fathers and families on earth. And a family is sort of the outcome downstream of the gospel, of marriage rather. And marriage symbolizes the gospel, and the gospel produces a family of God. And so marriage itself, the reason I don't want to exasperate my children, for example, or the reason I want to love my wife and so on, is because I want to represent the goodness of God the Father in family as best I'm able to. So if anything, nature is not destroyed by grace, but grace perfects, clarifies, and elevates these natural goods of marriage and family. So the beautiful story then is the image of God is not any created external thing per se. It seems to be tied to our dominion and our being fruitful and multiplying in ways that are uncapturable in a fish's life, for example. A fish won't take dominion over the earth or the sky, just the sea. An animal might not be able to take dominion of the sky or the ocean. A bird can't take dominion over all those either, per se. Humans can. And there's more to it than that. We are image bearers of God, and there's something unique about our creation. We are spirated animals, spirated creatures, we might say. Creatures that are animated by the life of God through His Spirit bestowing upon us life. Philosophers call that rational animal. And we have this kind of purpose or end, and that includes marriage and family. So we fill the earth and take dominion over it. That's very good. But if you can't get married or have children, well, you can still enjoy the reality to which these things point, namely God and the gospel and the family of God. But that, again, doesn't deny the natural goods. It only elevates them and makes them seem all that more important. So, in a nutshell, that's how I would talk about the image of God. It's not the created things from before. There's something special about it. We are animate creatures, rational creatures. And the image of God means that we tend towards marriage and family, which means we tend towards the things that symbolize the most important thing, Christ dying for the church and the family of God spreading across the cosmos. We can enjoy the sign if we can't biologically marry, but if we are or have children. But if we are married and have children, we can enjoy both in accordance with the gifts and calling that God has given us. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Also, please watch the video above my shoulder.